Take it away.
Well, we're going to look at the headlines, and there's really only one story to talk about this week, and that is the situation in Israel and Palestine.
Mm.
And hey, everybody, I'm happy to be here, and it's really nice to hang out with you folks and try to bring an integral developmental perspective to this tragedy, and yeah, and see what we can do to solve a wicked problem, which is a problem that is defined by it defies solutions. It has multiple solutions, and ultimately it's a problem that has to be grown out of. And so the answer is more development, as it often is, but intelligent development, and we could talk about all of that. But I want to start by doing the simplest of integral practices. And that is to become aware of where we are at this very moment as we relate to this situation at hand. So I invite you to do that. And we've all been marinating, or at least certainly aware of, the story as it's unfolding. And there are a lot of, sensibilities that integral thinking helps us to differentiate and integrate. So we'll start with the sensitive self. And this is our green postmodern self that is horrified by the suffering and recoils and even tries to avoid it or becomes depressed at all the atrocities. I'm not going to dwell on all of it. It's all quite very much online in the culture. And so we want to be aware of that part of ourselves. And we want to be aware of our rational self, the modern self, which is just in a way confused by all of this. How could it happen? What went wrong? Who was responsible? What broke down? What are the ramifications? How can we fix this? How threatened are we? And that is, the self that is also online at the same time. And then there's the righteous self, or the blue traditional consciousness that goes automatically to who's to blame. Our blue traditional mind is always busy figuring out who's right and who's wrong. And actually, there's not a lot of figuring in a way. It's funny. It's self-evident. It just arises. The dots are connected. Automatically, in our blue ethnocentric hearts, we know who the heroes are and who the villains are, and we tell a story from there. We start with the heroes and villains and tell the story from there, and maybe we tell the story that starts with the incursions on Saturday, or the occupation, or the founding of Israel in 1947, or Judea 3,000 years ago. But that comes online too, and we can feel into that ethnocentric self. Who do I relate to here? The Israelis, the Arabs, the white people, the people of color. And we can see this in the culture, that this blue self there's a big blue strata in America and in all over the world. Most of the world is pre-modern in this sense. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second here. But I want to also get into the final stage that we're going to feel into, and that's the red level, the bloodlust that gets activated. And we think, fuck those fuckers. We're right to fight against evil. They've been doing it to us way too long. We have to fight back with whatever we have. A lot of anger. This is the world of vengeance, recrimination, again, bloodlust, revenge. And we can see and feel into each of these energetics and worldviews, really. And we could see them in each other. We can see them in social media. We can, see that they're often at odds. And this is where integral consciousness comes in handy, because at integral, all of that is welcome in a sense, in the sense that integral helps all of these energetics make more sense, to fly in formation. And I like the word, there's a certain way in which it's powered by faith. It is for me, and I love that word faith, that sheer awareness of more, of including more of the story and the energies that are at play in real time, happening under their own power, and how you could hold all of that and more of that is what is the road to being more wise, more compassionate, and more part of the solution and less part of the problem. And this is especially important because we see that all of these forces are not only at work in ourselves, but in the situation itself, the world at large, and that it is in various proportions and various cultures and stories, and often violently combustible, as we are seeing now. So I just want to walk back through these stages of development in terms of how they're arising in the world at large, or in this situation particularly. And if we look at Israel and Palestine, the Israelis and Arabs, first of all, for those of us probably in this group, we know a lot of people in both cultures, or we know of people who are green. There's a big peace movement. There's big movements for cross-cultural exchanges between Israel and the Arabs. And people who want to live in peace and see the humanity of each other and enjoy each other. And of course, there's the virtual world of internet and social media. And of course, they operate in several levels, including red. But the arising of the virtual world or internet in general, just the perspective-taking machine that it is, the multicultural effects are just hard to overestimate over time when we think about the next generation and the generation after that, especially when you consider how long these recriminations and these cycles of violence have existed. So anyway, I've been, these peace people have been on my mind. I know some of them personally, and I know their hopes are dashed, and it's discouraging. And maybe in the best sense, they're all the more fortified. I don't know. But that's a piece of the green that we want to take into integral, that sensitivity and the peace in the harmonious world. The other contribution that green makes to the situation is that it's politically critical. It's critical theory. They particularly criticize any power dynamics and see the modern complicity in the creation of these pre-modern subcultures in, for instance, Gaza. And how Israel, the more powerful, has created life conditions. And life conditions is, I always think about this in terms of integral theory with Claire Graves and the spiral dynamics people, that life conditions are really what creates the opportunity for forward movement in terms of evolution. And we generally develop to the center of gravity of our culture by the time we're young adults. If life conditions is one of subjugation and domination, then that becomes the physics or the fulcrum of your worldview. It's what you wake up in the morning thinking about. And to the degree that there has been subjugation in Gaza, that is the life conditions that creates basically red. So we'll take a closer look at that in a second, but I also want to point out that Jews in general are naturally, I was going to say they're naturally green and progressive, but actually they're in the vanguard of evolution since monotheism, and maybe before, I don't even know. But also in science, business, commerce, and postmodern thinking after the Holocaust, World War II, civil rights. Jewish people are reliably Democrat, devoted to social justice, and often good social justice, because the green social justice, a lot of the social justice movement in the West is actually rooted in blue and red consciousness. But to the degree that it's about real social justice, this is the green we want to take into integral. So there's that. And then there's the orange, the modernity. And this is, of course, where Israel shines. They built a modern society in the middle of a pre-modern world, and they used pre-modern methods to do that. We would also say that modernity is a big story in the Arab world as well. There's the normalization, there's the Abraham Accords, there's potential normalization with Saudi Arabia. But, you know, there has been a change in life conditions in the last week. And that skin of modernity that is arising in the Arab world and in the Jew and in Israel, you know, this emergence or this eruption of barbaric red violence will knock people down a stage or two. You know, it's the old thing, a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged. And that is, so that's happening, and we're seeing that happening. And so now we're getting down into the pre-modern ethnocentric stage. And there's plenty of that in both of these cultures. We'll see just how badly knocked back Israel is into blue ethnocentrism right now, you know. And they definitely have potential, because if you think about Israel, it's populated by the Jews who were drawn to their ancestral homeland. You know, they're more ethnocentric than the Jewish diaspora in general. They want that Jewish state. You know, this is the dream of ethnocentric people everywhere. And we can feel that the call of that cultural louche, you know, that liquid space where it's literally a we space in the quadrants, you know, the lower left quadrant. And, you know, we know who we are. We banish the infidels. You know, God smiles on us. And, you know, everything's going to be great until inevitably somebody comes along and, you know, some invaders or strangers, and it's all ruined. And that is, you know, there's that sensibility is big in Israel. And of course, it's the default in the Arab world. People identifying with their tribe, their people, you know, the skin of modernity in the Arab world is as development, the nature of development, the higher stage of development dominates the previous stage. And so, you know, the modern stage was implemented in colonialism, but if you think about Dubai and Qatar and Saudi Arabia, a lot of these countries, they have their own modernity that is arising. And, but still, the ocean of Arabs is blue, and then there's the previous stage, which, and this is sort of characteristic in the worst way in the Middle East in general. And it's the blue-red. It's the holy, blue is holy, red is warrior, the holy warrior. And that's a really sour spot in history. And there's plenty of Jews here, some of these aggressive settlers. And, we've all seen documentaries and 60 Minutes on they really hate Arabs. It's their ancestral homeland. They're God's chosen people. And they're willing, and this is that's the blue part. The red part is they're willing to die in the service of that. And you can tell the difference. It's like the mullahs in Iran, the more they live in palaces, the more they're blue, the more they're willing to actually go up with a sword against Goliath or parasail into the enemy's territory. That's today's a good day to die, folks. Those are the red. That's on the red side of the spectrum. So that is, what we're dealing with here. And from an integral perspective, there's, a couple things that we can think about, and then we'll break into groups, because I don't certainly know the answer to this, but I'll throw out a couple things. First of all, one of the things I love about integral theory is that the base starting assumption is that we want everybody to be healthy where they are. We can't make people develop. We can, you can't make the rose bloom, but you can give it sunshine and water and keep it as healthy as possible. And it's what parents do with their red children and blue children, as they, try to keep them from getting in too big of a mess. And that is, kind of what we want to do. And we want to make a distinction between the modern and pre-modern center of gravity. Modern people will live in peace. Pre-modern people really won't over time. They just, that's the idea of conquering and, creating our God's paradise on earth is too strong. And so I think of Sam Harris's argument that if the Arabs laid down their arms, there'd be a Palestine. If the Israelis laid down their arms, there wouldn't be any more Israel. And that's the difference. And we want to keep that distinction in mind, because modern's better here. And this is a couple paragraphs here from Tom Friedman today in the New York Times, where he talks about this and the problems in Israeli politics, which I'm not really going to get into too much, but we all know the problems that Netanyahu's having, and that he's created this coalition that certainly includes these far-right holy warriors. So here's what Friedman writes. He says, going forward, Netanyahu's, let's see what he says here. That we want Hamas and Hezbollah, of course, these are the holy warriors of the Muslims. And by the way, they're, of course, not supported by probably a majority of Muslims who think, please go away and let us live in peace. But here's what Friedman says here about Netanyahu. He says, Netanyahu's way forward here is that he has to reconnect himself with the liberal democratic Israel. So the modern Israel, not the traditional pre-modern Israel, ethnocentric Israel. So that the world and the region sees that this is not a religious war, but a war between the front lines of democracy and the front lines of theocracy. That means Netanyahu has to change his cabinet, expel the religious zealots, and create a national unity government. And I don't I don't know what he has to do, but making sure that this is a modern defense, not a pre-modern, I think is very good advice here. Couple other thoughts. One is just in general that red is the problem in this world. Red is certainly the problem in the modern world. It is, again, it has the predator-prey, domination, submission kind of sensibility. They know how to do both, but they prefer domination. We thought we got rid of it in our modern world, in a way we have, most of us live lives of safety and comfort, amazing in human history. That's true in Israel as well. And this, starting Saturday, is an example of how that eruption of red is always there under the surface. And it's true in terms of crime. It's true in terms of geopolitics. And we really notice it when it's attack on the modern world. When there's these Slavic wars and wars in Africa, and it's as old as the hills, these fights within blue cultures. But when modernity is involved, like Ukraine, a modern enough country, at least modern aspiring, and Israel, then we notice it. It's like when crime comes to the suburbs, then we take note. And but one of the other things that Integral would show us is that, again, this is not new. What they're doing now was Western Europe for centuries of religious war. And the Vikings and the Romans and the Chinese, and history is war after war, incursion after incursion, killing children, women, kidnapping, enslaving, taking trophies, taking hostages, the American West. It's unfortunately, I don't get this planet sometimes, honestly. It's like, why did it have to be so hard? But this is, it's a lot of human history, and there's pockets of it here now, and that's what we're seeing. Again, the cure is development. We talk about cycles of violence, and of course, you think of the 100 Years' War in Europe. Cycles of violence, violence begets violence until it doesn't. And that cycle of violence doesn't hold when people become modern enough. And, think of Germany and Japan after World War II. Think of what are the chances that Germany and France are going to go to war again? It's basically unthinkable. So we do want that to happen. You can't make it happen. That we learned that in Iraq. So I think I'll stop there. And Rigel, I'll invite people we'll break into small groups. And I'm just curious what you think.